So today is June 5th, 2024, and our guest today is Hugh Brownstone. Hugh and I met each other at a press junket for Sony, wow, seems like 10 years ago or more now. And it was kind of funny as the day went on, we learned a little more about each other and a lot of similarities in photography. And, then he told me he lived in Pennsylvania. I said, oh, I used to live there too. And he says, well, yeah, I live in Paoli. And I said, God, you lived in Paoli also? I lived on a road called Cobblestone Drive. And he goes, well, that's the same road I live on. So it turns out that we were all from the same old neighborhood and knew it well, and knew people on the street and so forth. And it was actually pretty cool to meet you that way. And we've stayed in touch and met at photo and press junkets throughout all the years, and it's been quite nice. For many of you that don't know Hugh, he's got a YouTube channel, and he's worked really, really hard on it over the last few years. And he's done his own thing. And one of the things that I admire about somebody specifically, if they're making their nest in YouTube, is how do you stand apart from everybody else? You know, YouTube is one of those channels that you had people like Casey Neistat and Peter McKinnon that kind of set their whole things, and then everybody tried to copy those people. And, that's fine, but, everybody goes, hey, or wears their hat backwards, and hey, what's going on out there, everybody? There's all the same, it's like the same thing. And they're sitting at a desk and they put pretty lights on their background, and, they have their awards and cups and cameras and all sorts of, I've always decided just to make my background where I work. This is my office, this is where I work. Although I could probably make a nice setup. Hugh's been kind of the same way, but where Hugh differentiates himself is his presentation, the way he comes across, his dialogue. And if Hugh missed it in the photography world, he could have been an announcer or a host of a TV show. He's got a uniqueness and always has had a uniqueness. And I admire that greatly. He's an award-winning YouTuber. He's got some great awards, a Webby Award-winning YouTuber, I should say. He's a creator, a head instructor. He runs his own street workshops in New York, which are really exceptional. He's a screenwriter, documentary filmmaker. He's done a lot of things in his day. And of course, he's had a chance to interview some of the same legendary photographers that I've had a chance to meet, but his interviews with these guys like Elliot Erwitt, Joel Meyerowitz, Chuck Kennedy, Mark Lubel, and of course, Dr. Kaufman, who we were talking about a little earlier before we started this, are exceptional. And he has the way to bring out everything in a natural way, and it's pretty cool. He's working a lot with Leica these days. That's one of his main cameras, and of course, very big on street photography and how it's done. And he's quite fortunate, as I am, to have a wife that gets him. His wife, Claudia, is very involved with a lot of what Hugh does. And for all of us that have wives that actually understand what is wrong with us when it comes to photography, we have to consider ourselves quite blessed. So today we're going to do things rather different. Rather than have a presentation, as we do with many of the photographers, we're going to kind of open up the floor and talk about a number of different things in a certain order, and we'll see where we evolve from and everything. And we'll go for about an hour or so, and all along the way, anytime you want to participate, you can either put something on the chat and or unmute yourself and wait for the right opportunity and join in. But I do ask that when you're not speaking, that you do mute yourself, because we do have a fairly good crowd here, and we don't want any of the background sounds, the dogs barking and everybody else in the background. So after you're done saying something, if you don't have anything to go, just unmute yourself and then mute yourself, unmute yourself, and then unmute yourself again when you're ready. Just so you know where we're going with things, in June 19th, Alan Ross is going to be doing a presentation. And John, are you handling that, or is that Holger? Anyway, I will be on a workshop, and that will be handled by
one of us.
Well, yeah, one of you guys will be the
No one's
host.
asked me yet, but I can
Oh,
do
okay.
it.
I think Holger, was that
Yeah,
you?
yeah,
Yeah.
I'll do it.
So Holger will
Okay.
be the host of that episode, and I'll be in the Palouse running a workshop. Uh, Decided on July 3rd because it's the holiday weekend and it's really hard to get anybody, not only to be a speaker, but to probably spend some time. So we're taking the holiday July 3rd off, and then when we come back again on the 17th, we have Suzanne Mathia, and that's going to be really pretty cool too. Don't forget your host there, Jeff Shiwi, who's out in Seattle having fun taking a photography course. There's myself, John Cornicello, who is the originator of the photo chats back in the old COVID days, and Holger Mischke, who did a program recently. If you haven't seen his program, please get on our site and take a look at that video. His work is incredible, and some of the cool things that he's doing with cameras and stuff are worth mentioning. Just some of the workshops that we've been doing. I just finished the Faroe Islands workshop a week or so ago. The Palouse workshop, which I start next week. I have two Palouse workshops actually, so there should be two up there, but I'll start one starting next, I leave next Friday and don't get back till the 29th. So we've got 2 straight weeks of photography in the Palouse, which is my happy place. So I'm going to be doing very well. The Greenland workshop, we only have 1 spot left, and we only have 1 spot left because we changed ships, and now we have a little bit bigger of a ship. And if anybody's interested in an incredible photography adventure to Greenland in a new fjord system with all sorts of things to do and see and photograph, get in touch with me because we do have 1 spot left for that. I just finished a fine art printing workshop this weekend, and we have our other printing workshop for this year in October. That's already pretty much half full at this point. So if you want to learn about printing and work with Jeff and myself and John Panazzo, you will have an incredible time over that weekend in that workshop doing fine art printing and learning how to work and do all the aspects of prints from paper, surfaces, to profiling, blah, blah, blah. We already talked about the fact that right now you're all muted. If you do have certain questions, you can ask them in the chat, but this is going to be kind of a open forum, so please participate, but don't, like I said, don't forget to put yourself on mute. And after we have got to a point where we've closed, we'll stay online and socialize for a little while longer before we shut everything down and get on to our regular lives. So today's speaker, as I said, is Hugh Brownstone. Let me unshare my screen and we'll go to Hugh and we'll start this program. Thank you, Hugh, by the way, for making time today to do this. And please say hi to Claudia. And I hope all of you guys enjoy where we're going. And I'll kind of explain a little bit about some of the topics so you sort of have a direction here. So let me stop this screen sharing. And what we're going to try to do today, just as I said in the article that publicized this, is talk about the art, joy, and ethics of street photography, which is one of Hugh's mainstream or main joys and things. We'll talk about the camera industry because there's a lot of things to talk about in the camera industry and big shifts about to happen in the camera industry. And one way of doing and finding your own and honing your own artistic voice, I think Hugh has done a great job of that with what he does on his YouTube channel. And I really do suggest all of you go out and make sure you check out his YouTube channel. It's quite exceptional. And then we have some fun things to talk about. Photography, is it political? We're going to open up a can of worms on that one probably. And we have some parables we'll be sharing about the 3 blind men and an elephant and a parable of the tiger and the donkey, plus whatever else is on your mind. So Hugh, I'm going to switch it over to speaker view on my side of things for the recording and let you take it away.
Well, first, just right back at your better half, Deb. Hi, it's nice to at least know you're on. We met her actually in Pennsylvania a couple of years ago. Is it a couple of years ago now, Kevin, that we got together for dinner, the 4 of us? Feels like that, but that was lovely. And I also want to just say hi to Barry and Ron and Scott and Luis and Alex. And Cameron, although we've never met, we've begun to speak online. So hi to you. So it was interesting. I didn't know until a couple of days ago that ordinarily this would be a presentation. But I said to Kevin, I'm happy to have a conversation with you. That's about all I have the energy for. This notion of me not being Peter McKinnon or Casey Neistat, I've actually managed to break my arm just coming to a stop on a bicycle. So Casey Neistat was not a valid path for me. And Peter McKinnon, He likes tattoos and he has more energy than I had when I was half my age. So that wasn't the path either. In the end, we can only be who we are, right? So that's really all that I want to say about that. Just a show of hands, maybe. How many of you actually, for those of you who have your cameras on, how many of you actually engage in street photography? Oh, good, good. I don't know how much I'm going to tell you that you don't already know. I will tell you, and those of you who know me will have heard me say this any number of times before. The reason why I engage in street photography is because every time we go out, and Claudia and I go out together, basically always, and I see someone who looks interesting, I generally ask. And when they say yes, it reaffirms for me that the world is not a uniformly terrible place. And I need that affirmation. So that's a big deal because in that moment of yes, we are creating a moment of casual intimacy. And I don't know if you guys feel this way, but the academic research is very clear that these kinds of casual intimacies, just going up to the corner drugstore and picking up a piece of chocolate bark that my dad and I used to do almost every night when I was a kid, are good for us. The chocolate maybe not so much, but it's good for us. It's emotionally satisfying for us. The other thing that's interesting is that we don't do what I call take street photography. There are legendary photographers, most especially a Bruce Gilden or a Mark Cohn, who have and know they have every much a right to be on the street and photograph what they want, at least in the United States, as anybody else. But the kind of street photography that Claudia and I practice when we're doing any kind of street portraiture is what I like to call give and take. That is, the first thing that we do is give. When we identify someone, something unique about them, and then we go up and say specifically what that thing is, and would you mind? I mean, you've got a great tat, you know that. Would you mind if I take your photograph? And they say yes. All of a sudden, we are collaborating, and that again is a wonderful, wonderful feeling. There are questions. There have always been questions about the ethics of street photography. It seems to have gotten a little more shrill than it was in the middle of the last century. It was a different time. Uh, but I think it gets down to something as simple as golden rule. I don't think it's more complicated than that. But there are multiple genres or subgenres of street photography. There's portraiture, as I've just been talking about. There's urban landscape, which those of you who know my work know that that's a big part of what I do. There is classic street, which is the kind of thing Cartier-Bresson would do. Maybe you guys do this too. I'd really like to open it up and hear where you guys are. And there is bearing witness, which I refused to do until about 2018, 2019. And then I felt I had an obligation to document. And I had a very interesting conversation in one of our workshops where one guy wanted us as a group to give him feedback to a photograph he'd taken of an unfortunate man on a subway grate. And the person sitting next to him got so angry that he sputtered and he called it obscene. And two guys over from him was another one who said the exact opposite, that he had dealt with mental illness himself and that to not photograph is to deny its existence. So ethics is a very complicated thing, made more complicated by different rules in different countries and then different cultures. But let me stop talking for a minute because I really see this as a dialogue, and
Yep.
I'd love to get your sense of what you're doing and what issues or questions you have as you pursue that particular genre.
Let me jump in as one of the first kind of the push things through here. One of the questions that I know I always have when I'm on street photography is, do you ask the people that you're shooting, and or do you stop people sometimes and ask to shoot them?
Right. So it's, of course, situationally specific. I would say 95% of the time, if we're doing street portraiture, we ask. Um, if we're doing what I'll call classic street, and it's interesting, there are some very well-known photographers who insist that the only kind of valid street photography is candid street photography. Frankly, I think that's nonsensical. And the greatest photographers of the craft have done both, surreptitiously recording people and also being very direct with them. But it gets again back to the issue of why one does this. And again, for me, it's not just the image, it's the process. It's being out on the greatest street in the world for the genre, the home of my birth, where I lived until I was 7 years old, and then came back and lived there again after graduate school, where I saw the 69-70 and 73-74 New York Knicks semifinal games at Madison Square Garden. So yes, we generally ask, but there are times when we don't. And there are times where we don't and do take the photograph. There are times when we don't and we don't take the photograph. You know, if you spend any time on the street, you begin to read people, and over time you get to read them very well. And you can tell that when someone is trying to get from point A to point B, it's not really fair to ask them to stop and let me take something from them,
True.
right?
Well, don't a lot of people just kind of like, especially in New York, are kind of used to people taking pictures on the street like that? I mean, Jay Mizell used to walk around the street always with a camera around his neck doing that, and never asked anything unless he found somebody that was interesting to engage.
Right. So the question is always, is it interesting to engage? There are times when we'll take photographs where where I want the photograph, I want the face, I want the sleeve, whatever it is that I want, and it looks like they're busy. So I take the photograph, and if they catch me, then I just go, "Hi, is it okay?" And 9.5 times out of 10 on the streets of New York, it's not a problem, not at all. And there are times when I don't take a photograph because it feels wrong. And there are times when I don't ask because I violate the golden rule as part of bearing witness. So that's a difficult thing to navigate, but we each get our own sense of it.
Isn't it?
Yeah,
Well, but couldn't, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think the landscape of street photography has changed quite a bit. And when I started out, uh, I was a kid. I was like, 14, and I was all over the place with the camera. But it was just me. Nowadays, everybody's got one of these, and there's an awful lot of people making pictures on the street. Uh, Sometimes they ask, sometimes they don't ask. Sometimes you see some really hilarious stuff. Sometimes you see some very embarrassing stuff. Uh, I try not to embarrass people. I like to do street portraits. You see some interesting character, you know, you might want to shoot a picture of them, but sometimes I will ask, sometimes I don't ask. Uh, Depends. You got like you said, you got to read your subject. And having grown up on the streets of New York City, I got pretty good at that. So I'm not too concerned about it. And I like the urban landscape thing too, but there's an awful lot of these around. And when everybody's got a phone with a camera, there's a whole world of citizen street shooters, photojournalists, whatever. And it's kind of interesting, more interesting than it used to be, I think.
Jim, you had your hand up. When we were kids, when I was a camera, you were a nerd. And if we made someone's photograph, no one had to worry, is it going on Instagram? Am I going to look stupid? Now you make a photo and it's like, where is this going to show up? People have to be concerned about what's going to happen with that photo. Even though it's going to get lost, unless we have it following, it's going to get lost immediately in the flow, fast tidal wave of other photographs. But that's what I see has changed, is that in the past, no one really cared. Unless you were a photojournalist where it might be in Life magazine and, oh my God, I'm going to have a photograph in Life magazine or in Time or Newsweek. Now it's, who are you? Unless, and this is one of the struggles that some of us have with street photography, do we engage the world with a smile? I admit I don't always smile when I'm out with a camera, and people react to that. As certain people here can attest, you greet the world with a smile, people smile back. I was in a photo meetup many years ago, and there was this big kid, lanky, loved had his first camera. He had that joy of, I'm a photographer. It's new. It's wonderful. He was going off to India, spoke nothing. He'd never been out of the States before. And he's going to a complicated other part of the world. But he had this huge smile. And he wandered around India and he would smile at people, point his camera, and they go, yeah, of course. I don't know who the hell you are. You're a big kid from the States with this huge smile. Of course you can make my photograph. He came back with all these wonderful photographs of people smiling, doing their thing, leaving baskets, doing all this stuff.
What a wonderful point. We our first Streets of Tokyo workshop was last December. And whenever I'm in a country, a foreign country with a language other than the one I was born into, I try to learn a phrase or two. The first phrase that I learn in whatever country I go to, except for Japan, is where is the toilet? But for wo est der Toiletten, où est la toilette, dove il bagno, I got that down. That's important. In France, it's also acceptez-vous carte de crédit, because I don't carry cash. But in Tokyo, I found the language so difficult that I really only learned this. And I tried to learn the inflection that is native to the country. And so what I learned how to say is, excuse me, do you speak English? Because I knew that I wouldn't be able to get past that. And the first two people that I went up to, misumasen, aigo ka wakarimasu ka? And both those first two times they looked at me and said, oh, I'm so sorry, I don't speak Japanese. So that was pretty great. But you're absolutely right. All it is a smile and body language, right? Body language, and it's enough. So we got absolutely wonderful imagery in Japan. There, the places we were, it has to be said, it has to be boxed in or bounded by that. People were happy. They were just happy. And it was easy. I also remember in the very first Streets of New York workshop we ever had, well, we had a very intense gentleman in his 30s who was very good at what he did. And he came up to me after the first day and said, I just want to follow you because I want to see what you're doing because I get it. I take photographs and now I'm looking at my photographs and the people that I approach, they don't want me doing it. I see it now. And there was something in his demeanor that caused that. So that's a great comment. When it comes to everyone having a camera these days, I hear that a lot. And of course, that's true. And it's fundamentally different from other kinds of cameras in other eras. And yet with the advent of the Brownie at the beginning of the last century, everybody had a camera. And in the early 1960s, Kodak came out with the Instamatic. And then everybody had a camera. But let me ask you this, just a show of hands. When you see a person on the street with an iPhone or an Android phone, is it more than 50% when they're actually going like this?
Good question.
Please raise your hand if that's been your experience. So it's kind of fun. I actually enjoy taking pictures of people taking pictures of themselves, but after a while that becomes a trope as well. But I think it's a little bit different that way. As far as the notion of people wondering what it's going to be used for, we get that question all the time, not most of the time, in point of fact, but regularly. And most recently, we were in Grand Central Terminal, and I saw two Port Authority people, and I asked if I could take their photograph, and they said yes. And then we start collaborating. Can you move here because otherwise the clock will come up. It looks like it's coming out of the top of your head. And they said, what will you be doing with this? I said, well, if I use it, I'll post it on Instagram. But if I don't, and if you don't see yourself, but you still want an image, here I am, just DM me and let me know. Well, yesterday, I got a DM from one of the people who was an employee at the Port Authority who asked if I wouldn't mind. Would it be okay if I didn't post their images? And because they had spoken to a supervisor, and I said, absolutely. In fact, I will just delete them. And that was an opportunity to actually put someone at ease, and I was happy to do that too.
It's funny what the rules are. Obviously the street kind of thing, but Recently, Deborah and I went to document the experience of trying the Apple Pro Vision. And we were doing pretty good. Deborah was photographing me doing it and so forth. But you know, there are sensitivities and rules, especially on private property, not just the street. And eventually we got permission to use it if we wanted to on our website. But you know, they kind of came over and go, you know, please don't use that anywhere and so forth. But yes, you know, so many people taking pictures. I mean, even while we were in there, there were other people taking pictures. A lot of concern with how those pictures are going to be used, or you know, what may be said with those pictures. Hugh, one of the questions that I have, and I've always been meaning to ask you this, is that, you know, like, you know, as a landscape photographer, a lot of guys take landscape photographers to sell the images that they take, and hopefully somebody buys them, puts them on the wall, and they make some income from them. What are you, and what is your goal to with the photographs that you've been doing all these years? Your work is, you know, great, and you got a great collection, but where's it
Thanks.
going? What are you going to be doing with it? Do you have an end goal in mind?
My end goal is just doing it. We photograph for ourselves.
Right.
We derive enormous joy out of that. It's been on my to-do list for multiple years to sell the prints online. I make some notion to that. We did put out a book which sold out 2 limited runs. Maybe someday there'll be a gallery show, but it's just not at the top of my priorities list. Upstairs, we have one print that is 50 inches on the long side, dye sublimation infused to aluminum, that I get to look at every morning when I'm having breakfast.
Yeah.
Across 90 degrees is another print 60 inches wide that Claudia took of the skyline of New York from Long Island City, where we go all the time. And I see that every day, and that makes me happy. And as I walk past it on the way to the garage to take Claudia to her other job, the light changes, and that makes me happy. Claudia has a photograph of my 92-year-old mother's hands. She was a pianist, not a professional pianist, but an accomplished amateur pianist. And now they're gnarled like roots of a tree. We have a photograph that I took looking west from United Nations early in the morning so that the Chrysler building is illuminated. And I see that every morning, and it just makes me happy.
Well,
That's why we shoot.
it's interesting, I guess. You know, Vivian Meyer, we all know the story of Vivian and her photographs, and they basically just kind of sat in a box, and while she enjoyed taking the pictures, you know, they went undiscovered, and it's kind of a shame for the amount of talent that she had of working on the street, and now,
Agreed.
you know, she's becoming kind of a household name. And one of the things, of course, you know, I'm going to get into my whole printing thing, is the fact that, you know, as you start making this collection, and we talked a lot about that this weekend, and always when we do one of these print workshops, is I'm a firm believer that you don't have a photograph until you have a print. And it doesn't necessarily have to sit on a wall. You know, if you took a trip to New York to do a workshop and you took all these great pictures, you know, pick 15 or 20 of them and put them in a portfolio box or a photo tin, and you've at least documented it and made a hard copy of it so that you've got something that's tangible and tactile that you can work on.
Right
And I
there.
think this is something where our photography has changed. So much goes up in the cloud. How do you keep it from the cloud? You got a few in your house that you can enjoy, but I'm sure you've got a lot more that you can put in and go back to occasionally enjoy. And if you ever leave this planet, you're leaving part of, you know, you behind, and the importance of the work that you've done. So it's something I wrestle with. Is I try to make sure I make prints, and I'm a print addict. Okay, mainly because I love doing what you're doing, whether it be street or landscape or people or whatever. But I just can't stand it if it's just sitting in the cloud. And you know, it's great for social media, but one flick and tomorrow it's gone, and you know, you're on to something else. How do you
Yeah,
You
feel
know,
makes
about all
Kevin,
perfect
this?
sense.
Yeah, let me jump in for a moment. John, now you had your hand up for a second there. Did you want to say something? And Charlie Gibson's asking where you classify Ouija in the vast realm of street photography.
Well, Ouija is super interesting. You may or may not know that he was the son of a rabbi. And at the age of 13, he said, I'm not doing that. And he left home. and his work is a very specific sub-niche or subgenre, although he did other work for which he's not as well known. But he was, I was going to say literally an ambulance chaser, except that's not right. He chased cop cars. In fact, at one point he lived across the street from a precinct. He had a radio in his car, and his trunk was a portable darkroom. And of course, he shot with a press camera. I believe it was F-16, where he had it set, zone focused with flash. And he really was not simply the inspiration for, but actually consulted on The Naked City, the late 40s noir film. And it's interesting how it was a two-way street, that photography influenced film and film influenced photography. But when we do our workshops, I include a slide on Ouija, although he's generally not what most people think about when they think of street photographers.
Joe, I'll be with you in a second. Ron Lustig said a great book in response to something in the chat, and I didn't quite catch what he was referring to. You can either throw that in the chat or open your mic, Ron, and let us know. And Joe, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say two things. One about street photography. You mentioned Ouija. I'm a big fan of Ouija. I'm also a big fan of Diane Arbus. And to Kevin's point, I think my largest single expense these days is ink. I have to print everything. I got stacks of prints over here. I don't know what's going to happen with them or who's going to look at them, but I've got them because, like you said, if you can't hold it in your hand, it's not.
Sign them, Joe. Sign them, whatever they are, no matter what they are. Get a pen out and just go around and sign every picture you have. Well, and I'm serious. When Michael Reichman died, and we all know Michael, he left us, a ton of prints behind, but none of them were signed. So none of them are really worth anything without that signature of yours on them. So just, a word of advice to everybody: sign, sign, sign.
That's actually, I think, a good thing to recommend. So I have two Husky cabinets.
I got a scan of it when I put them on every picture.
And they each have one very wide, like 40-inch wide, shallow draw, then another 6 drawers, which are shallow in each one. And I use all of those for prints, and I do sign them. I think
and you
that's
do
great.
make prints.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course I do.
Yeah.
Of course I do. And I love them. And sometimes people from our workshops send me stuff, which I love as well. The issue for us is that we've run out of wall space. And Claudia and I threatened to put up a structure in the backyard just for that. But we do have other things on our priorities list that come first.
Yeah, but you can do zines, portfolio cases, even 4x8 or 5x7 photo tins that don't take up a lot of room, but you can sit them in the living room or on a coffee table or in a bookshelf and pull them off and share them. So I think part of the myth is trying to get people always not to think about a print that has to go on a wall, because there's not enough walls anywhere to put up all the pictures that we probably take, but at least to have the prints, whether they're in drawers like you have, that you can share with people and pull out when you want. Because if I ever come to your house, we're going to be doing a lot of print looking. I can tell you that.
Actually, to that effect, I can humble brag a little bit with. Well, Hugh, pardon me if I can share this with everyone.
Yeah.
Okay, Ed.
But this is one of my favorite pieces that go on the wall that I'm proud to have, thanks to Hugh. This is Hugh's picture, if no one can recognize it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was done in Seattle. And, this is the kind of thing where if I was going to say, if someone asks, I just send the print. But Ed is very special. So it was my pleasure to send him that print. Making money off the prints is not where I'm at.
Print exchanges, I think, are.
On the other hand, it was funny that Ed just humble bragged about my image, but those 3 images behind him are his. And he's a wonderful photographer in his own right.
Well, these 2 came from being on the workshop with you.
I know. I know.
Carmen has a question. Carmen, you want to go unmute yourself and
Yeah, Cameron. It's okay though. I've
Or
been
Cameron,
called
I'm sorry,
much
my
worse.
eyes aren't good enough to look at the small print on the screen.
Okay, it's more of a street name, maybe Carmen, maybe for New York, but Cameron. So Hugh, just you know, totally new to the whole experience here, and really appreciate what you do online because it's quite revealing, entertaining, informative, and you bring a very unique perspective. I think, like at the top of the introduction. But where do you see like the with the camera technology? And I'm not a big fan of like the geekery that goes around with what I see on too many channels. But where do you see the digital impact coming in versus print? What's happening with younger folks doing this sort of thing as a hobby, or are they? Where are we headed with this, in your opinion? Because I think the notion of printing is not something that most of us folks that are not pure into the hobby or professionals maybe fully appreciate. So I'm just curious your insights on that. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Cameron, and thanks for the kind words. It's interesting. I recently was in Japan. I had been invited by Panasonic, as had a lot of people, to look at the S9, and I did a very long video on that. It was 40 minutes long, and there are any number of times during that video where I say, well, for me, this is missing this or that doesn't have that. And then I would always say, but what do I know? I'm not the target audience. There are a couple of things that are happening for people who are much younger than I am, certainly. One, using the S9 as an example, it is designed to reduce the distance between intent and execution, which is one of my things. I want equipment that minimizes the distance between intent and execution. And the S9, they had a slide up that says capture, edit, share. And then they crossed out in red, edit. It was how do you get from being out, whether it's on the street or on the beach or wherever, and going straight to social media. And I can tell you that the entire audience was thinking about that. But there's another reason why printing is not perceived the same way it was. First of all, it's far more expensive than digital. And if you use analog film, that just makes it more expensive. There is much less of an incentive to learn how to develop film or print. Again, not only because it's expensive, but now we know what I certainly didn't when I was using the family bathroom when I was 10, 12 years old and flushing the chemicals down the toilet at the end. You don't do that. It's bad for the environment. So the other thing is, with that being said, you still have a number of people, let's say in their late 20s and their early 30s, who love the idea of film, but they don't shoot very much. And this is really interesting to me because what is unassailable about a digital workflow is that the feedback loop is much, much faster. And to the extent that anyone believes that there's something to Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours to competence, pick whatever number of hours it is or any number of exposures, but however you measure volume, film radically slows down the feedback loop. You can't chimp an image, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, Annie Leibovitz cover of Rolling Stone, John Lennon and Yoko Ono, the cover was the Polaroid test shot she took. So the greatest professionals in the business had a way of accelerating the feedback loop and making corrections right there in the field. But for people shooting analog, that doesn't happen. And when it comes to prints, not only are they expensive, but the real estate, literally the amount of wall space that's available to them, Kevin, I'm going to hold your point about smaller images aside for a minute, is drastically more expensive. The ratio of income to housing cost has just exploded. It's terrible. When I came out of graduate school, I could live in a gut renovated loft on my own. The first year out of graduate school, I made as much money as my father, who was an academician, a full professor. Now it's impossible. I forget what the statistics are, but some insane number of people coming to New York, for example, spend more than half their income on rent. So it becomes a financial thing. And what's interesting, going back to this notion of geekery and gear, I have a camera. I got my hands on a camera, which a digital camera, which has a relatively low resolution sensor. It's not full frame. And when I'm doing reviews, I'm looking at, generally, I don't do near minimum focusing distance testing anymore, because all that tells you is how the lenses operate at near minimum focusing distance, and that's not how the real world works. But even when I'm out on the street and I'm blowing up to 1600% doing A/B comparisons, I decided with this camera I wasn't going to do that, and I was just going to print, Kevin.
Good for you.
And
It's good.
I just said, you know what? I'm not going to compare it to anything else. I'm going to start with an 8.5 by 11 print. Looks great. Looks great. And now later today, actually not today, I have that deadline to talk to you about. I'm going to do a 17 by 22. And I think that the advances are so dramatic that the best film cameras, Nikon D6, Canon F1, pick your poison, Leica M6, with anything, you know, with Tri-X, with Kodachrome, none of them hold a candle to what one can do, even, can I say this out loud? Even with the 48 megapixel raw images coming out of the latest smartphones. And we can argue about lens character and all the rest, and the joy of lens imperfections. But as a practical matter, I don't, much as I love film cameras, because that's what I grew up with. And in one of these larger drawers, I have a Canon FTQL, which was the first camera I ever used, the Canon F1, the EOS 3, Hasselblad 500 CM, Nikon FM3A. It just, you get the idea. I don't use any of them. I don't use any of them because digital is just so much faster and improves one's craft so much more effectively. Does
Thanks
that
for the
answer the
answer.
question?
Yeah, it's totally good. And I know other people want to ask questions, but the 40-minute reference that you said is kind of funny because most of the time when I watch those things, your posts on the channel, it just flies by. And I have to give you the feedback that coming from the corporate world, I really appreciate so much the time you spend crafting the narration, the humor, all that is fantastic because so many of these channels are just four streams of consciousness, unfortunately, and it's hard to watch for newbies. But also, my last two questions is like, how do you store all these images? And then if you could also touch a little bit on the usability of whatever set gear people like, because I think what I'm learning is just being comfortable with the camera imparts a whole lot more capabilities to it. But yeah, thank you so much, by the way.
Oh, well, thank you again. I appreciate that you appreciate me. So that's great. As far as storage is concerned, I'll shift to video for a moment. Here, and then twice again down here, I have RAID, 8-bay RAID systems. And I have about 150 terabytes of storage, but that's mostly for video. I do have 5 terabytes of photos up to about 2018, and then I switched to Adobe. And for Adobe, I rely on the cloud, but periodically I back up from the cloud over to Backblaze, which is an online backup system, which the first time you initialize, if you have my kind of data volumes, it takes literally weeks over a 1 gigabit Ethernet connection to get it all uploaded. So
Yeah,
that's
once
how
it's there, it's there, you know, so.
Yes, exactly right.
They all, Backblaze also allows you to buy drives and send everything as a drive so that you can get it initially started. And then you do the incrementals as you make your changes. And you can also reverse that in case you completely died. You can get a hard drive that comes back down so you don't have to, take 3 weeks to rebuild everything too.
Is there
Workflows.
another part to that question before I go on to, we got Joe and John with their hands up here.
Yeah, let's go on to those guys. There's quite a few on the comments too. And we need to kind of be looking at the time and some of the other topics that we want to cover too. So,
Here, let me jump over to John first. He hasn't spoken yet, and then I'll go over to you, Joe.
Hey, good afternoon.
hey, John.
I have a question. I've been shooting. I started shooting in 1970, I guess. I went to journalism school, and I was at Kent State University, and that's where I got my first camera. And I stuck with those cameras for years. In fact, I took one of my very favorite photographs with them in Paris in 1974. I don't know if you can see that.
Nice shot.
Yeah, lovely.
Really nice.
Shot it with a 150 millimeter telephoto lens on that Pentax. And I didn't discover it for years until I was going through some negatives. What I want to ask, though, I have a couple of things. I'll make it quick because I know the speed. The legalities. My favorite type of shooting, I guess you're going to call street photography, although I do other things. But the legal ramifications of things. I have a little part-time job now. I live in Clinton, New Jersey, and a part-time retirement job that I'm just doing because I love it at a state park. And they have a lot of campers and people come in. And met some very, very interesting people and the opportunity to take some amazing photographs, which I've done. But I'm a little concerned for legality, and I don't like asking. I shoot with a Sony RX10 4 that if any of you know.
Quite a zoom range.
Yep.
Yeah, Bob Chris.
Good
I
little
bought
camera,
a
man.
camera from Bob, and I met him in Mexico. Yeah, 24 to 600, and fully extended. I don't know if it's not big, and it's light. And the first shot I ever took with it when I got it in the mail, I shot the top of a flagpole, a ball at the top, and I looked at it and I go, oh, look how crisp that is. And then I went home and put it on the computer, and I stopped a wasp in motion. I could see the wings. So I thought, well, if I misfocus, it's not the camera's fault. It's my fault. But that camera is he can shoot anything he wants as a Sony ambassador, but he uses this a lot for travel photography and that type of thing. And for street photography, you can shoot down a city block with that thing and end up seeing things that you did not see when you took the shot, which is a lot of fun. But should we be carrying model releases around with us?
Not at all. Not at all. Let's just cut to the chase on that. The United States is wonderful that way. You don't need that. The only time you need a model release is if you intend to sell the photograph so that it ends up on a bottle of mouthwash. But for purposes of one's own use or artist's use in a book, in a gallery, that's a non-issue in the United States. It's more of an issue in other countries.
May I jump in really quick as a advertising producer? How you doing, Hugh? As an advertising producer, it's nice seeing you too, my friend, always. I've been working in advertising for 35 years, and no, you do not need a model release. You don't at all. As long as you are in a public place, you are allowed, and that's your right, to make a photograph. That's it. Now, don't do that in Spain.
Or France.
Yeah, I heard that overseas. So in other words, bottom line is, I'm out of the woods. if I take a picture of anyone at any time that isn't lewd or isn't, but anybody is fair game at any time.
Yep.
Yeah, I guess,
It also
unless
goes
I'm them.
Joe?
that goes back to the golden rule too. I mean, I wouldn't do anything that I was uncomfortable doing,
Of course.
right? So the same thing, would apply to you, I guess. Don't do anything. Do anything that, if the roles were reversed, would really piss you off.
I think one of the things that I have enjoyed about photography and shooting what I like to shoot, like those two gals in Paris who I didn't have the nerve to talk to, is getting to meet people. You take somebody's picture or you ask them to take their picture, and boy, you can have some wonderful conversations and meet some wonderful people. And I did something in my hometown. I did a 15-foot by, I don't know, 12 by 15 foot called The Face of Clinton. And for several, like 6 months, I took photographs of people in my town, which is a small town in rural New Jersey. And we did this giant thing on the art museum, and it's just everybody's face. And I spoke with every one of those people. I got to know them, and they hung it for the 150th anniversary, and it's still hanging in the town hall in a big spot they have for it. And people loved having their picture taken, and they loved talking about the experience. And now they can go see their picture, 10 years ago when it was taken. So that's enough out of me, but I'm enjoying the conversation.
Thanks. Joe, you want to finish up your piece and then we'll continue on?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I assume like everybody else, I've got a closet full of film cameras that I don't touch anymore. And my kids keep bugging me, Dad, I need a camera. I need a film camera. And I've given them a couple of low priority film cameras. I've never seen a single picture that they shot on film, because they are, millennials, I guess. And the feedback loop, as has been said, is way too long when you're shooting film. You have to send it out. I mean, they don't have dark rooms. They're not going to get involved in that.
Yeah, see, John's holding up his Polaroid.
Get film for that. But the bottom line is I've given up a couple of low priority cameras, which don't bug me. I'll never get them back, by the way. But I also haven't seen any pictures because they can't shoot it and then upload it to Instagram right away. And that's kind of sad. It's kind of sad. I think that the craft, I mean, listen, last week, I fell asleep watching television. I woke up 11:30. I turned off the TV and got up and went to bed. And between the TV and bed, I tripped over something. I tripped over something in the dark, and I stubbed my toe.
He's going to show us the picture.
Left a pretty good bruise. So, but I was fooling around with my iPhone, and I photographed it. And by the way, I signed it somewhere. There it is.
Yeah, there you go.
I scanned my signature, so I can just paste that in at any time I want. But the bottom line is, it wasn't instant. I mean, I had to get it out of the camera, get it into Lightroom, do a little manipulation, and I had to print it. But even for my kids, that takes too long. They all have they both have phones, which I'm paying their phone bills. I don't know why. And they can shoot and they can upload, and it's done.
Interesting. Once again, it's all about that stuff. To keep things moving, though, unless anybody's got another question or two they could jump on, I would love to kind of move to something else that I think Hugh does a lot with, and transition to a little bit about the opinion of the camera industry, the cameras we have available today, and where camera reviews are going, and maybe where cameras are going, because we're going to see a big technology shift in the next several years in regards to the gear that we have.
Hey, Kevin, I'm sorry. Can I jump in and say one more thing?
Yeah, Joe, go ahead.
And I'll set up for the duration. I do a lot of urban landscape, what I would call cityscapes. But and the reason I started doing that was because we talked about city apartments and lack of wall space. The first apartment I rented once I left the nest. I found a little studio apartment on East 21st Street between 2nd and 3rd Avenue, and I had one window which opened up to an air shaft. So my view was a brick wall. And so I went out and started making cityscapes. So I could print them, frame them, hang them, and have something to look at other than that brick wall. That was my motivation. All right, I'm done.
So Kevin, you're go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh, go ahead.
Kevin, you asked what do you want me to respond to, Kevin?
Well, I think to discuss a little bit about the camera industry. You know, you get to go to a lot of the press junkets and do reviews and camera reviews and talk about the camera technology. You know, like myself, you get cameras to try out and work on. You know, where do you think we're going with photography these days in the gear? It's kind of a big mishmash. We've got the talk of global shutters on almost all cameras in the next 3 to 4 years. You know, computational photography, and of course, there's a lot of talk about AI coming in, specifically a lot with what Apple's about to release sometime later on this week. So, what's your take on all this?
So I happened to enter YouTube at a moment in time when the S-curve for digital single lens reflex technologies had hit an asymptote, a plateau. And for those of you not familiar with the concept of S-curves, it's steep at the beginning, and then it curves off, and then it levels. And what that means is that over time, when a new technology arrives, there's a rapid increase in functionality, and then the rate of innovation slows, and then that technology can't go beyond a certain point. And I think it was Christensen at Harvard who did a famous case study about hard disk drives and the movement from, you know, the big platters of IBM 370s to 5¼ inch. But in photography, it was DSLRs to mirrorless. And I don't know if the rest of you perceive this the way that I do, but I experience mirrorless now as reaching that plateau, that the things that are improving are increasingly incremental, not really all that important to the art of photography, not important at all to the joy of photography. But for example, Sony's autofocus was worse than Canon's and Nikon's years ago. Then it was better. Panasonic made the decision not to embark upon a hybrid contrast detection, phase detection autofocus system, and that held them back. But at this point, the difference in autofocus performance has dramatically narrowed. The rate at which sensor resolution increases has basically stopped. More important from the artistry is the dynamic range of sensors. We have been pegged at 15 stops for years now, and I don't see anything really happening there. Electronic shutters have allowed us to increase the burst rate. As a street photographer, I could care less. As someone interested in sports, what's interesting is that autofocus systems that good and burst rates that fast make it easier for people to enter the market, but it makes it more difficult for everyone to have a compellingly different and therefore worth more money image. A friend of mine, Brian Smith, won a Pulitzer, but he won a different award for the photograph that he'd gotten of the U.S. Olympic diver Greg Louganis hitting his head on the board. If those of you remember that image, that was taken on I don't know, something like a Nikon D3 with no, was it a D3? May have been a D3, or it may have been something else. It may have been an F something, but in any event, with the motor drive, it was film camera. It was a film camera. With a motor drive, he had maybe 4 frames per second. Now you can shoot 30 frames per second, and you can have pre-burst mode. What that's really useful for, most especially, are birders. Birders, because you're waiting for the bird to take off, or you're waiting for the bird to come down and grab the fish out of the water. And now it's like shooting fish in a barrel. So there's that. But the concomitant of all of this is when the market basically collapsed, where unit volumes went into the toilet. the companies had no choice, those who survived, to increase the margin on the much smaller unit volumes that they had. And then it became all about the specs. And most of the specs really don't matter. When I grew up, there were only three things that I could do. I could change the shutter, I could change the aperture, and I could focus. At the beginning of each roll, I'd insert it and I'd have to set the ASA dial for those cameras of mine that had metering systems. But now it's something completely different. It's completely different. And the complexity that has been layered on top of it is appalling. And again, if we talk about the shortest distance between intent and execution, well, if all you have is shutter speed, aperture, and focus, then that's like that. And as autofocus began to become more and more important, well, it was actually interesting. My Canon 1D only had, or ES3 only had 3 autofocus points, and I didn't have a problem. But what happened was we allowed our expectations to grow with the spec list. And now when we look at all of the, oh, look how many customizable function buttons we have. Look at how many menu choices we have. That's actually contrary to what most of us need. So I think that cameras will get simpler. Hasselblad and Leica, I own both, are the current state of the art for that kind of thing. The advances that are being made in the editing world with AI, generative fill, and with AI masking are superb. Claudia bought me a Magnum print of a Thomas Hepker image of Muhammad Ali, you know, this one. And we got the one which has all of the markings for how to print it. And it's fascinating that an image that simple has that many distinct areas on the print that need to be dodged or burned. It's the Ansel Adams story of Moonrise Hernandez, New Mexico, which he said took him decades to get right. And by right, he meant that it felt like what he felt. He was able to communicate that. But that was the result of dodging and burning more than 50 separate sections of the one print.
Sure.
And now with what's happening in Lightroom and others. Kevin, I remember when you first showed me Capture One years ago, the masking was extraordinary compared to Lightroom. Well, that gap has closed.
Changed. Oh, big time.
And right now, literally today, I am preoccupied with this notion of presets and real-time LUTs and looks and filters, because to me, most of that is noise. It's noise. The idea of going from shot to social media with no intermediation, no real attempt at curation, no real attempt at taking the time to think what's really important in the image and how to refine that is problematic to me, but I ain't 20.
Yeah, isn't that the truth?
Yeah.
It's what about camera reviews these days? There's a big kind of stink, and you were part of that Japan trip. How do you think camera reviews are going to be changing? There's a lot of talk of the fact that, are all these YouTubers that are putting out videos at the embargo date, doing it because they want views? Are they doing it, and are the camera manufacturers pushing them? I've heard of relationships with, Insta360 saying, we don't want to say, have you say this is sponsored reviews. The whole idea of cameras reviews on YouTube seems to be changing, and a lot of people have a big, strong opinion on it. Where do you stand on this stuff?
Well, I start with this. Everyone is entitled to an opinion, but not every opinion is worth paying any attention to.
Well said.
So I really think that very little is going to change. I think that in the case of Insta360, that seems to be a very clear example of a lapse in moral and legal judgment by a company. I think it's that simple. And Jevin, who I know, who posted that, I thought did the right thing by communicating it. Although I have had instances that I've never talked about online because I don't want my views to come from that. Yeah. And when you say the industry is going to change because of one person, one person putting out a video that I would never put out, because let's talk about a couple of parables. So for those of you who don't know why I have this very long, complicated title, Three Blind Men and an Elephant, just a show of hands so that I don't waste people's time. How many do not know what this parable is? Can you just raise your hand?
I think there's enough of us.
Okay, so it's it's an Indian parable, but apparently it has a Chinese counterpart, and the number of people, the number of blind men changes. But here it is: three blind men bump into an elephant. One person bumps into the leg first and thinks it's a tree. Another person bumps into the trunk and thinks it's a snake. The third one takes a little bit longer and bumps into the tail and thinks it's a broom, right? And from this, it gets interesting because there are any number of questions that we can ask. For example, why didn't they use their other senses? Would they have come to different conclusions if they'd used their sense of smell, if they'd used their sense of hearing? What would have happened if they had collaborated? What would have happened had a sighted man come on scene? Would it have taken that for the three blind men to realize that they are blind? In the end, the moral is about intellectual humility and recognizing that it's important to take multiple perspectives to understand what it is that one is actually seeing. And that is the impetus for what I do and the way I do it. I was in the process of shifting from digital SLRs to mirrorless back in 2014 for fun, because I was beginning to get into video. And for years, I was simply sharing what it is that I was really seeing. But I was always afraid that there would be someone in the audience who was just like me and who would pounce on me for missing something, which I don't do. But I have that in me, which is why I'm probably the slowest YouTuber in space, because I take a much longer time to figure things out. There is a profound lack of intellectual humility, which is fairly rampant in not just this space, in YouTube. There is an immaturity where someone will blame a company for simply being part of a capitalist system and ascribe to that company motivations that actually don't exist. There is more to that particular story, and I have never responded to any of that on YouTube, and I won't, because I don't want to provide oxygen for something that I think is most charitably misguided. Most charitably misguided.
Well, Hugh, you're not a clickbaiter, which is something I've always liked about what you do.
Well, and thank you, Kevin, and I'm not. And what's interesting is that, again, whether it's YouTube in the photography space or in the automotive space or in the musical instrument space or in the political space, the hyperbole has risen to such levels that everything is, how many videos have you guys seen where the title was "The Truth About This" or "Brutal Honesty About That" or "The No BS This"? And the implication is that they are the only arbiters of some truth. And that's just preposterous. And it is an abdication of us as viewers of our responsibility of thinking things through clearly. But it's not just in the capitalist system, it's just as prevalent in politics. And again, we are fed by media, we are fed by any number of stakeholders who simply know how to be performative, and they demean all of us because they let the dogs out. They give more room for people whose opinions aren't worth the time it takes to hear them, the sense that they have something important to say. You may disagree with me, and that's fine. I'm not trying to assert that I know something better than anyone else, but it strikes me that before this was a planet of however many billion people, it was a much, much, much smaller place, much more thinly populated, much more difficult to get from one village to the next. My view is that there was a village idiot in every town, but because there was only one village idiot, the village idiot kind of knew he was a village idiot. And so he had some humility about that. Okay, I'm not going to be a doctor because I don't want to cut. But that seems to have gone away. And it is to our detriment as a society that this is the case. But then I also want to say this. I want to talk about the parable of the donkey and the tiger. Again, a show of hands so as to not waste time. How many of you are not familiar? Okay. All right. So tiger is lounging, minding his own business, and donkey comes prancing into the clearing. And he says, "The grass is blue." Donkey says, "The grass is blue." And is it okay if I speak French with all of you? Do you mind this?
Yeah,
It's
go
a
right
New
ahead.
York.
We have no
It's a New
laws
York.
there. Yeah,
Okay, it's a
we're
New
good.
York actually kind of thing. Tiger says, "What the fuck are you talking about? The grass isn't blue. The grass is green. What's wrong with you?" And then Donkey says, "No, no, no. The grass is blue. The grass is blue." And Tiger says, "Fuck you. We're going to go straight to Lion. I don't have time for this. And we're just going to get it sorted." So they go to Lion, king of the jungle. And Donkey says, "The grass is blue. The grass is blue." And Tiger just looks at Lion and says, "Would you just straighten him out, please?" So Lion turns to Donkey and says, "Donkey, you are so right. The grass is blue. Enjoy. Have a nice day." Donkey's happy. Away he goes. And Tiger looks at him and says, "What the?" Lion cuts him off. He says, "You're going to be banished for 3 days." And Tiger said, "You're banishing me. You're banishing me. You know I'm right. You know." Lion says, "You are banished because an animal as noble, courageous, and intelligent as you should know better than to try to convince an ass of anything." He then goes on to add, "And you've wasted my time." So I just think that what we had was nothing more than a kerfuffle. I don't think reviews will change at all. The real issue is that people with very little to say have no problem hyping the terrible signal to noise ratio they have. And unfortunately, they are often rewarded for it. But okay, of all the things that you or I could worry about now, you think this is important? I know you don't.
No.
This is nothing. This is nothing. We stand on the precipice of a repeat of history that most people don't understand. I don't understand how they don't understand it, but we're not here to talk politics. Except to say that I personally believe that the best photography has always been very political. I will give you just 2 examples.
Perfect.
The New York Photo League, renowned, and if you don't know it, please just look it up, was comprised of legendary people who became legendary photographers who had a very specific point of view. I'll give you 3 examples. I lied. The Farm Security Administration under the Roosevelt administration in the 1930s and 1940s used photography with people like Ansel Adams and most especially Dorothea Lange, but Gordon Parks as well, among others, American Gothic by Gordon Parks, Dorothea Lange with Migrant Mother and with the Japanese internment camps. But the purpose of the Farm Security Administration in the 1930s was to use photography to help the rest of the country understand and have sympathy for the people, fellow citizens who had been hardest hit by the Depression and terrible weather, right? The Dust Bowl. And it was for the purpose of gaining support for providing some relief. That's one example. When Dorothea Lange was then commissioned to photograph the internment camp at Manzanar in California, where Japanese Americans were relocated because the government was concerned about a 5th column, she took those photographs, but who she was, her sensibilities, shone so brightly in her images and were so not what the government was looking for that they didn't release them to the public for half a century. Final example, Henri Cartier-Bresson. The last retrospective of his that I saw, large retrospective, at the Museum of Modern Art was when Peter Galassi was the director of photography there. And they published a book called The Modern Century. Wonderful book. There's a photograph on the cover, wonderful photograph, some combination of steerage like Alfred Stieglitz did with relatively speaking, a more modern feel, wonderful black and white as well, but it's a mother hugging her grown son. It's not sharp. In fact, there's a little bit of motion blur. I don't think it was in focus either, and yet it was a superb, just superb photograph. But the really interesting photograph for purposes of this discussion was the photograph of the French family sitting at water's edge in front of the Seine for a newspaper that he was working for. The thing is, Peter Galassi, who was wonderful and wrote the text for this compendium, said it was a progressive newspaper called Ce Soir, except it wasn't progressive. It was communist. And in the 1930s, there was a clear failure of capitalism, which gave rise to fears that other isms, other economic systems, most especially communism, might supplant it. And if you were young and smart, you would have dabbled. You would have at least looked at it. And so it was with Cartier-Bresson. The interesting thing is, the really interesting thing is, that Cartier-Bresson was born into one of the 200 wealthiest families in France. That money came from the revolution occurring in textile mills. And he was therefore very fortunate to have a stipend, which allowed him not to have to work. And that shows up in his photography. It shows up in the fact that he flirted with Dadaism. The photograph in Spain, do you guys know it? Children at the periphery, much closer to the camera, a big bright wall with intermittent windows and a big fat man with a hat in the middle of it. My friend Sean Tucker, who's a well-known YouTuber and a photographer in his own right, said, I don't understand that image. He says, the first thing that I would do is level it out. And he didn't have the benefit of understanding the political context in which Cartier-Bresson came to age, informed his sensibilities, and allowed him in later years, for example, to photograph a woman, France, being shamed for being a collaborator, for being in the right place at the right time to photograph a run on a Chinese bank during the Chinese Civil War, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, I'll stop.
Wow.
Please don't.
Yeah, it's like if we weren't already using up too much of your valuable time, and of course I know you've got to get back to a project you're working on. There's so much to say. I mean, I think we could keep this thing going on forever. Maybe we ought to just have a in-person workshop one day where that's all we do is just sit around a round table and talk about it, because there is so much to talk about.
Sign me up.
There you go.
Well, on the preset LUT piece that you mentioned, going back a second, were you saying that that didn't interest you? Is that what I heard you say?
That would be the charitable thing. The charitable would interpret what I said. A style is not an artistic voice. A style, I've actually said that a consistent style is much less interesting to me than the substance of what I'm shooting. My ability to, through my composition, through my editing, somehow communicate a sense of how I responded in the hope that at least some of that will resonate the viewer. The very premise of a preset pack or a LUT defies logic, because the basic selling point is hey there, I'm whoever it is, buy my presets and you can have a unique look. How's that possible? Definitionally, that's not possible. On the other hand, there is value in presets, just the way there is value in looking at oneself in the mirror in a changing room in a department store and looking at the suit or the dress that you're wearing, if for no other reason than to say, oh, I actually do like that, or no, I don't really like that, or to say, okay, I can use this as a base, but then I want to accessorize that with, I don't know, a handkerchief or watch, whatever. In a photography perspective, that means, okay, I switch in Adobe Lightroom from color to black and white. Good. Now it's black and white. Now I'm seeing it differently. Except me personally, I'm not seeing it differently. I see it the same way. I see in black and white. But then it's, instead of a handkerchief or a watch or a ring or a cravat, it's, I swing the slider this way on clarity, or I swing the saturation if it's color that way. So it becomes a starting point. These things are available everywhere. They're available now inside an S9. They're available in Adobe, in Instagram, in everywhere. And it's not that people who do presets are bad people or that they don't have things that they can offer that people find valuable. It's just that I've never done presets because they make no sense to me. If you take that Thomas Hepker image of Muhammad Ali, it's not just about what the contrast level is. That's hardly it at all. It is the application of different light to different segments of the frame in order to achieve a specific purpose. And the latest kerfuffle with the estate of Ansel Adams saying to Adobe, you are selling stock images, AI generated, for an Ansel Adams look. That's not right. And I agree. That's not right. Sorry, long answer to a very short and direct question.
I think it's a good answer though. Holy cow! Because that's another thing we didn't even touch on today is AI. Maybe next time.
Well, I'll just say this about that. Again, in our workshops, this notion that we need to observe an aspect ratio, or that a camera has to take an image and that's the end of it, is patently absurd to me, because I know enough about photographic history to know that, for example, that wonderful photograph of Fan Ho, where there's just this perfect shadow and a woman at the end of it, was fabricated in this sense. The girl was his cousin, and he put the shadow in post. The photograph of Migrant Mother by Dorothea Lange has a pinky, I think it is, one finger missing on the right side of the frame because it bothered her, because she had started in a lab and was good at retouching negatives. She took it out. My favorite portrait of all time, having nothing to do with street, environmental portrait, is that of Igor Stravinsky taken by Arnold Newman. He cropped it. He cropped it. So to the extent that we use AI for that, I think it's completely fine. If there's a fire hydrant in a landscape, well, actually, I keep the fire hydrant. In fact, Ed, if you're still on, I think there's a fire hydrant in that image of mine on the right side. But if I remember correctly, what's not on the left side is a car. I think I took that out.
Yeah, it's still there. He's going to hold it up. Let me see.
Car is gone. The car's gone. I took it out. I took it out with generative AI, but I left the fire hydrant in. I mean, that level of granularity to me it's authentic. It is, what can I do to make this image more accessible to people who haven't had exactly my experience? And that means somehow eliminating all distractions from this young lady and Betty Boop. So.
Excellent way of putting it. I think that this is a challenge that every photographer asks. I mean, I certainly sat through somewhere, there's one photographer many of us know that said, look, if I shot a landscape and there was a Coke can in it, I'd leave the Coke can because that's the way the landscape was. And, once again, you create a philosophy or a set of rules that you want to live by that sometimes can be a detriment to you too. So I think as an artist, though, you have the ability to do and make your own choices on how you want to make your presentation and your photograph. And
right. And in that particular instance, it becomes what's most important to you.
Yeah.
If what's important to you is to show how humanity has encroached on pristine landscapes, then the Coke can becomes critical. If what you really saw, what spoke to you, was the magnificent vista beyond, then the Coke can gets in the way. You take it out. But in either case, it is insight into the person behind the image.
Excellent. So the artist's choice. And I think that's, the vision of the artist. And as artists, even though we're photographers, we are still artists. We have that choice we have to make, and we have those ethics that we have to live by in our own personal way. Hugh, you've done it
Yes.
very, very well.
Thank you, man.
Yeah. So look, I don't want to cut you short, but then again, I know you've got to run, and we've also been going for a long time. And I want to say, first off, Hugh, there's some really interesting things over in the chats, and maybe we can just have a couple minutes if anybody just wants to chime in on their own. This was a fast hour and a half, man. Very fast. And it was a different format than we normally do, and I appreciate the fact that you're open to that and had the idea of, let's just go in and do this. I love you, man, and every time I see your work, and every time we get together, it's always a blast. And
Right back at you. Right back at you. And you have a wonderful audience. So thank you guys for
Dan,
chiming
for
in.
those of you who want to save the chat, if you go up to the top of the chat, there's 3 buttons. If you click on there, you should be able to save the chat for yourselves. There's 3 dots.
Hopefully he will come back on, and maybe we can do some more of this kind of talk and discussion. It's always amazing to sit down with Hugh and have a discussion regarding this. But please take a look at Hugh's website. If you haven't visited his YouTube channel, it's special. There isn't a YouTube video that he puts out that doesn't make you think. And I know right now he's working on a script, and it takes a lot to put one of these things together. There's a lot of thought that goes to it, a lot of how you craft it. Some guys, somewhat like myself, are one-take miracles. I just get up and talk. Others do a lot more thinking about what they're going to say, and Hugh's one of those guys, and I respect that so much.
Well, I envy you. I envy you.
But we do it our own way, and I think we try to answer that for our audience, and it's just fun. And I wake up every day, and I know Hugh does, and everybody on here does. Photography is our passion and our love. We've been doing it. It grabs a hold of you. It corrupts you in some ways. It gives you new habits of buying too much gear, too many camera bags. But in the end, when you make that print and you're holding your photographs and seeing your photographs, nothing in the world makes me happier, and it saves a lot on therapy.
Well said. Well said.
Anybody, thank you, Hugh, again, and give my regards to Claudia. Hopefully we'll be bumping into each other somewhere along the line. The invitation's always open to come visit here and play around at the studio.
I so want to take you up on that. I so want to take you
You
up
will
on that.
sooner or later.
Yeah.
Everybody else out there, thank you so much for being part of this today. I'll shut up for a minute, and if anybody wants to just unmute their mic and have a discussion about something, I'll leave it going, but I would like to stop the recording if that's okay. So let me stop the recording. What's that?
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Hugh. I miss you guys. Please send my best to Claudia.
I will. Count on it, Luis.
Recording's being stopped.